Hello and happy marvelous Monday, everybody. I hope that you are well. I am Spantastic. I want to welcome you today to the segment, the discussion, the truth about tenant screening. I'm live on Facebook, I'm live on YouTube, and I am live on LinkedIn. Please let me know which platform you are tuned in on. I love to know where my viewers are tuned in from. Also, if this is your first time tuning in, if this is your first time to this channel, welcome. Thank you so much. I'm Karissa Spann, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. And today's segment is all about the truth about tenant screening. So I'm going to touch on that today. This segment is for landlords, new seasoned landlords, but it's also for tenants. My goal today is to share information to positively impact and improve the rental community. First and foremost, let me just put this disclaimer out there. I am not an attorney. The information that I share today is not legal advice. However, I am sharing the industry's best tips as well as practices. If you have a question, if you have a comment, please don't be afraid to drop it in the comment or the chat box. I will definitely respond to them. And also, if you have not already subscribed to that YouTube channel, please find me on YouTube. Over on YouTube, you can find me Landlord Lyfe with Karissa Spann. Landlord Lyfe with Karissa Spann. Please make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you'll be the first to know when I'm live, when I'm online, and when I am uploading or sharing new content. Is that all right? So because this is a live session, I do want you to know that every Monday, right here on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, this is where you can find me. You can also find the replays on my YouTube channel where I've discussed numerous topics to help landlords, to help tenants, and I always reply or respond to my comments that come in on my YouTube channel. So please make sure that you're tuned in every week, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. And so today is all about tenant screening. It's all about tenant screening. And I have one mission today. That's to share information to make sure that it's relevant and it's clear. It's not just for landlords. It's not just for tenants, but again, it's for the entire rental community. So maybe you are a housing professional, maybe you are a housing provider, or maybe you know someone who is, or maybe even a tenant. This segment is to just to share some information so that a lot more people will be informed about effective tenant screening tips, and then also tips that tenants should know before completing the application. So please make sure that if you find this information of value today, please like, please tag, please share it with others. I'm not an attorney, but I'm just sharing information today. And sometimes I get a lot of questions. People are asking, well, Karissa, are you an attorney? I am not an attorney. Okay, so let me just say that again. So today's segment is all about tenant screening and what does that look like. I know that because we are in the 6th month of the year, this is the time where a lot of people are looking to move because it's a warmer season and it's convenient and comfortable around this time of the year. It's usually June, July, and August where a lot of people are looking to move. Before you allow tenants to move into your rental property as a landlord, there are some things that you should know, because knowing the information will better position yourself as well as your rental property business to attract your ideal tenant. Now, over the previous weeks, I've shared horror stories of landlords who did not have a strategy, who did not tune in advance, and they did not have the mechanism in place to efficiently and effectively manage their rental property business on the front end, which is screening applicants. There's a way that you can and cannot do it. I like to put an emphasis on that because there are laws in place to protect tenants And just depending on where your rental property is, it could be in a tenant friendly jurisdiction. Whereas if you make one mistake, it could cost you thousands of dollars. And so this is why I show up each and every Monday, just providing this information. It costs nothing but your time. And so I do hope that I'm sharing something today that will help many of you who are landlords. So I'm going to get right into it because I do have a lot to share today. And as we are thinking about this summer season that we're in, there are a lot of things happening in and around rental communities. But here is what I want landlords to know and understand, because there are some common mistakes. Uh, the biggest thing that I've seen as it pertains to common mistakes is that sometimes landlords are relying solely on credit scores without checking references. And I know that sometimes you may not feel like it's necessary to check a credit reference. And so I've shared this in a previous live where you sometimes don't only want to rely on the previous landlord. So for instance, if you're a landlord and I'm interested in renting your property, I'll complete the application. And on the application, it should ask my current or prior landlords, right? So many applications, it may ask for the landlords or the place of residence for the past 5 to 7 years. Now, here's the thing. Don't solely rely on the current landlord. Here's why. Because sometimes when you only conduct a reference on that current landlord, you may not get accurate information. Okay. And that's the worst mistake that I see some landlords making. They'll check with the current landlord. And so you always want to check with the previous landlord, because the current landlord may stretch the truth. Here's an example of what that could potentially look like. Now, let's just say that you have someone who's been in a rental property for maybe a year or two, and it's not really clear to you why they are leaving their current landlord. Now, sometimes the current landlord, like I said, may stretch the truth. They may say, oh, well, yes, this is our tenant. And sometimes with the landlord reference, it may ask, would you rent to this tenant again? But here is where I've seen some landlords, the current landlords, they'll become a little crafty. They may say, well, yeah, sure, I would rent to this tenant again. That could be a stretch of the truth. Now, I am guilty of having done this. Stretching the truth is what I'm talking about. So in a situation where I've had a tenant who was maybe not the most desirable, or maybe that landlord and tenant relationship just was not a good one, it was cheaper. It was more cost effective to stretch the truth, to say, yes, this is a good tenant. I would definitely rent to that tenant again. Now, it's like I said, it was cost effective to stretch the truth versus having to pay out of pocket for an attorney to take the tenant to court in a tenant friendly jurisdiction where maybe it took 9 months just to get a court date. And so this is why you don't want to solely rely on that current landlord for information. Here's what you do want to do. You want to check the previous or the past 2 landlords to see what they would say, because sometimes you'll get the truth, especially if it's a tenant who has moved frequently. You want to consider, why are they moving so often? Are there any red flags in their history in paying their rent? You do want to understand that history. So I just wanted to put that in there, because sometimes it's easy to make that mistake. And that is a common mistake that I've seen a lot of people make. All right. So let me pause for a second. Hey, Preacher, thank you so much for tuning in. You said, do you have to keep a tenant application and any information from a background check for a certain period of time? Absolutely. Great question. I would recommend keeping that information for 5 years. Here's why, because something can come up, and it's better to have that information and not need it versus needing it and having it. True story. I had a landlord who was sued some years back in the DC metropolitan area. They had never signed a lease with the applicant. The applicant later filed a discrimination case against that landlord. The prospect, or the applicant, if you will, stretched the truth and said that they entered information on their application and the landlord used it to discriminate against them. Well, because that landlord did maintain an electric copy of that application, they were able to go before the judge, provide a copy of that information to show the courts and the judge that the information that the applicant claimed was used against them was in fact not true. And so, yes, definitely keep those applications on file, whether it's a hard copy or a digital copy. You want to maintain those records for 5 years. Now, some people will go as far as keeping it for 7 years. I would say 5. 5 is the average time frame. Great question, and thank you so much for that. Absolutely. So here is another common mistake that I have seen landlords make. They just totally skip the background check altogether to save time and money. That is a big no-no. I think that when people do that, they are really setting themselves up for failure. It's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot, if you will, because when landlords allow tenants to move in, skipping the background check, you don't really know who the person is. Now, I'm not saying that you must, when you conduct the background check, that you must deny a person if their record is not clean. You can definitely still rent to individuals who have a not so desirable background, but you always want to check. You always want to know it. Don't skip that, because although you may think you're saving yourselves time and money by not conducting, or you're skipping the background check, sometimes it could actually cost you money or more money, because maybe you have to take this tenant to court somewhere down the line, or something happens in the rental property. Whereas maybe if you conduct that background check, you would have known the red flags. You would have known a little bit more about that person. Here's what I commonly say to people is, on the beginning, on the front end of establishing a landlord and tenant relationship, you want to know who that person is. It's kind of like, consider it a relationship or a marriage even. You don't usually, most people don't usually jump into bed with somebody they don't know. They don't usually marry someone they have not spent time to understand. Well, a landlord and tenant relationship is almost that important, especially for small landlords. If you're self-managing, or maybe you're not a large landlord where you have 100 or more doors, right? You don't have 100 or more rental properties. And so you want to understand who that tenant is going to be. And so you definitely want to avoid nightmares. You want to avoid horror stories by skipping that background check. So please make sure that you are not doing that, because that would be a huge, huge mistake. All right. So that's the second one for landlords today: skipping the background checks to save time and money. Never do that, because it could cost you more money in the end. Now, here is another common mistake that I see landlords making. They fail to verify employment or income sources. I know that is something a lot of people are not doing it. And sometimes going or taking the low road is not good for your business. It's not good for your bottom line. So you definitely want to verify an applicant's income, even if they are participating in some sort of housing subsidy program. You want to verify the income. But now, when they are participating in a housing program, please know and understand that income is a protected category as it pertains to fair housing and tenant rights. So if they are participating in a housing program, you can still check and verify whatever their income is. So if their income source is employment or pension or TANF or retirement, right? Whatever their income source is, I strongly recommend verifying that information, because it's better to have it and not need it versus needing it and not having it. So please make sure that you are verifying information. Here's why that is important for landlords, especially if you have a tenant who is not participating in any type of housing program. That's going to be important because you want to verify that they actually can afford to live in that rental property. Okay, so it's nothing worse than allowing someone to move in and they don't have the capacity to pay the rent. I know that desperate times calls for desperate measures. I've had applicants who came to me, they were looking for affordable housing, and they were willing to use their entire check. Maybe they were on Social Security, or maybe they had pension. There were individuals who would have loved to spend 60, 70% of their check, their earnings, or their fixed income to pay the rent. Now, me being me, I would do a huge disservice to them as well as myself if I allow them to move in knowing that they could not afford that rental property. So please make sure that you know what you can and cannot do. And yes, again, even if they are participating in a housing program, you can still verify the income. You just can't hold it against them that they're in the program, because again, that is income is a protected category. So definitely do not do that. But please always make sure that you verify that income. It may be employment. It may be another source of income. There are different categories of income. As long as the individual can afford it, then that's what matters most. But sometimes you don't know it until you do that check. So please make sure that you are doing that. All right, so that's the third common mistake that I see people making: failing to verify employment and income sources. Always do that. Do that at the beginning. Don't wait until the tenant get into the property and now you want to start asking those questions. If they're in the property, it's already too late. So you want to know in advance. Okay, and so that's the third biggest mistake that I see landlords making. But now let me just share some fears why landlords, housing providers, property managers are doing this. Because and I think that when it comes to fear, essentially fear is false evidence appearing real. So let me just put that in a way. There's a fear that accepting a tenant that will get into the property and will damage it, right? This is one of the biggest fears that I've seen. Now, there's really no way to know 100% for sure that a tenant will not damage the property. Here's why I say that. Because you can do your background check. They can check out well. But here's what I do know about people. Sometimes you may not meet the real person. Sometimes you may, in fact, meet a representative of who they are. If you have a professional tenant is someone who knows the law, they know the system, they know the loopholes. And in many cases, they know all of that much better than the owner or the landlord. They know what games to play. They know how much to do, how much to pay, what to say. They know the lingo. They know the jargon. They know all these things. They know their rights. And so a professional tenant can put on an air that they're the perfect tenant. They may even have good credit. When you look at them, they may have a polished look. I had a young lady, true story, I had a young lady. I believe this was back in, I think it may have been 2017 or 18, somewhere around that time frame. I gave this young lady a break. I was managing a property and she was a single mother. She was in college and She did not have the best landlord and tenant history. When I conducted the background check, I verified that information. I still gave her a chance. She worked hard. She went to school. She was a mother. She promised that, Karissa, if you just give me an opportunity, I promise that my son and I, we will love this apartment home. We will take care of it like it's our own, and you won't have any problems out of me. Okay, cool. I'm not really big on words. I look at actions, but sometimes, again, you don't really know a person when you're just meeting them. So, nevertheless, I allowed this young lady to move in. She paid her rent the first month. She paid her rent the second month. Somewhere around the third or the fourth month, the rent payments became a little bit late. They started to come in a little bit slow. So around that seventh or the eighth month, the boyfriend moved in. Now, what I did not share is that at her previous place of residence, there were several situations where it was domestic violence. The boyfriend, the baby father came over. The unit was damaged. It was destroyed. So she assured me before she moved in that it was over. She had a restraining order that would not happen at this rental property. Well, we did an inspection. You go into the apartment and guess who's there? You guessed it. The baby father who had a habit of beating her up, destroying the unit. He was there. He didn't work, and so he was just kind of hanging out. She was working. She went to school, and it became a situation that made it uncomfortable for the other tenants in the building. They were fighting, they were arguing, they were smoking and doing a number of things. And so I had a conversation with this young lady. I said, hey, listen, I'm going to have to evict you if you don't get your act together. If you don't take control of the situation and what's going on in your home, I will have to enforce the lease. And by the way, in accordance to the terms of your rental lease agreement, I quoted the paragraph and all of that in the lease. And I told her that I would evict her if this behavior continued on, right? If she didn't stop, she would definitely be evicted from the property. She assured me that she was going to get her act together. And I think that she meant well because she told the boyfriend, listen, I can't get put out anymore. I was already evicted. This landlord was nice enough to let me move in, right? So she went through all of that. She had those conversations with the boyfriend in our presence. I did follow with the letter. It died down and calmed down over a period of time, but it started back up again. And why am I sharing these stories? Because I want people to avoid some of the nightmares, the horror stories. I want you to avoid going down some of these rabbit holes that many have gone down. Okay. And so we did have to eventually evict her. And that was my first eviction. It was heartbreaking for me to see the kids' toys being put out by the U.S. Marshals because of the moms, because of the parents' behavior, right? And so sometimes you can definitely go above and beyond, but I know that for many landlords that there's this fear of tenants who damage property. Now, like I said, at first glance, everything seemed cool, although I did do a background check and I knew that there were some issues there. Just looking at her appearance, she was polished. She was a polished professional. And I could give many, many more stories about tenants who, at first glance, they appear to be one thing and then turn out when they got into the property, something happened. Well, sometimes things are out of a tenant's control, especially if their guest is responsible, or maybe they have children or relatives or other people, family members, loved ones, and friends who are stopping by the property and making it really hard for them. I have seen elderly tenants, grandmothers, grandfathers who did not know the behavior of others in the rental home, and it made it bad for them, right? Sometimes things happen, bad things do happen to good people, but at the end of the day, it is still a rental property business. And so I do want you to understand that if that is a fear that you have, you're not alone. Here's another fear. renting to someone who will consistently pay rent late or not at all. I know that this is a fear. At the end of the day, it is a business, right? At the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, it is a business. And many of you already know, you've been watching me, you've been tuned in. You know that if you treat your business like a business, it's going to pay you like a business. If you treat it like a hobby, it's going to pay you like a hobby. Nobody, I don't think anybody in their right mind anticipate having a tenant to move into the rental property and not get paid. It doesn't feel good. It's not fun, but sometimes it does happen. And that is a big fear. This is why you want to understand and know the importance of effectively screening every applicant. You don't want to skip you don't want to skip anything at all, right? And I know that another fear is being sued for discrimination for improperly screening tenants. I've been talking about fair housing laws and what you don't know can and will hurt you. And yes, that is in fact true. And these are some of the top fears I see that a lot of landlords have. They don't want to be sued because of what they don't know. So they would just rather take the chance of not screening applicants at all. Well, if you know what you can and cannot do, just abide by the laws and the rules and the regulations that are in place. Because ultimately, I know that many landlords desire finding a reliable tenant who will pay rent on time and to reduce that turnover rate. What is a turnover rate? A high turnover rate will be bad, meaning that a tenant is always moving in or moving out, or you can't keep a tenant. Something is always happening and you always have a vacancy. I had a young lady who reached out to me. She wanted to know, well, Karissa, I have this apartment building. I typically do well with my tenants, but here recently I had a lot of turnover. You have to look at how are you screening your applicants on the front end? Who's coming through those doors? What type of relationship do you have with your tenant when they do move in? Right? And so that is a desire. That is a result of actually having a process in place and actually going through the process of screening applicants the right way. Another desire that I know that landlords have is having peace of mind, knowing that their property is in good hands. Ultimately, that is the goal, right? We all want someone as a landlord or a housing provider. We always want someone who is reliable. We want someone who's going to pay rent on time. And we want someone who will take care of the place. We want to turn it over and know and understand that while they're in that rental property, that they're taking care of it. And they're treating it as if they purchased the property themselves. But there are a lot of frustrations that comes with being a landlord. I get it and I understand. I've been in this industry for over 2.5 decades. And I know that there are a lot of frustrations. I talked about high turnover, right? A lot of people are frustrated when there are frequent vacancies, when there is constant turnover. You get a tenant in, doesn't work out. Now you don't have income coming in. Here's what I do know. Brick and mortar will never pay rent. Vacant rentals will never put money in the bank. You don't get revenue by having vacant units. And so that's always a frustrating moment. I think that many of us can agree to that. A lot of people are frustrated over property damage and maintenance issues. If you're constantly repairing things in that rental home, whether it's an apartment or a house, regardless of the style or the category of housing, sometimes it can be frustrating when you're having to put out so much money for repairs. And a lot of people are also frustrated dealing with late payments. Here's what I tell owners when it comes to late payments. Look at the history of that tenant. Number one, is it that the tenant cannot afford to pay the rent? Or is it that they can afford it, but maybe they're just not budgeting or managing their finances? Because those are totally two different types of tenants. A little earlier, I talked about how You should always verify the income of tenants. Well, if you verify up front that the tenant can't afford to pay the rent, you already know, well, the rent is it's affordable for them, so they should be paying their rent. But now, if it's a situation where they just cannot afford it, maybe they lost their job, maybe something happened that caused their finances to change, right? It significantly decreased. Look at that. Try to offer that tenant some help or some resources. Maybe refer them to some sort of agency or organization who could assist them with paying their rent. Now, if it's the flip side, and if it's a tenant who they can in fact pay the rent, and maybe they're just choosing not to because they're bad with managing their money, then in that situation, you might do better rather enforcing that lease and taking that tenant to court, because there is no worse behavior than you not taking any action at all, because that is sending a message. It's sending the wrong message, if you will, to that tenant, to say that their behavior or pattern of not paying their rent is acceptable. So those are frustrating moments. I know that there are more desires, there are more frustrations, and there are more fears. But those are the top 3 common mistakes that I see landlords making: relying solely on the credit without checking references. And again, I always recommend to not just check that current landlord, check the prior 2 landlords if they have lived in multiple places. Another common mistake is skipping that background check. Don't ever skip that background check to save you time and money, because it could cost you more in the end. And then also failing to verify employment or income. So I want to focus my attention on tenants for a little bit, because I want tenants to understand things that you can do before completing the application. All right. And if you have comments, if you have questions, please drop it in the comment section, and I'm going to respond to all of them. But I do want to get these tips in a way, because I want you to know and understand, if you are a tenant, or if you know someone who is a tenant, how to prepare for completing applications. And like I said in the beginning, I know that this is the time of the year where a lot of people are looking to relocate. They're looking to move. Before you complete an application, first and foremost, be honest and transparent. If you have not had the greatest landlord and tenant history, or maybe you've never rented before at all, don't be afraid to share those things. It would be perfectly okay to share up front what your story is, versus going through the process and being denied, because many landlords are going to conduct a background check. If you, for instance, if you had a landlord who checked your reference or checked your credit, they pulled your credit and something popped up and they did not decide to approve your application, don't keep going through the process of having people to run your credit, because that's not going to help. When someone is consistently running your credit, that's only going to make it worse. So be honest and transparent up front before that landlord runs your credit. All right. Provide accurate information about your finances. Don't stretch the truth. Don't create pay stubs, because landlords will verify your income. You also want to thoroughly prepare for those background checks. So ask questions. It is okay to ask a landlord what that application process is. Ask them if they're looking for a preferred credit score. Ask them if they're looking for references. Ask them, what is their policy? Do they have any rules or regulations when you move into the property? It is okay to ask these questions. You want to communicate clear. You want to communicate promptly. If a landlord is asking you for information, maybe they're asking for birth certificates or social security cards, and they can, and they should. know that in advance. Be prepared to provide that information. Because let's just say you really like this property, right? You're anxious to move in, but you don't know where maybe your child's social security card is, or maybe you don't know where the birth certificate is. Well, if you know that information in advance, you already know how to start to prepare. Because let's just say there are other applicants who are also interested in that rental property. That landlord may move on to the next person because you're not ready. And so that's why it's going to be so important to properly prepare for that application process. Ask those questions up front. There is no harm in asking questions, right? And so start early, prepare. And like I said, be honest, showcase your stability. So when it comes to showcasing your stability, you want to show that you're the best and the strongest prospect or applicant for that rental property. Do you have a good rental history? Do you have a habit of paying your bills on time? Do you have a habit of communicating with your landlord when things go wrong? Do you cooperate with your landlord? Do you have a positive attitude? Are you mean? Are you grumpy? Let me pause here. Let me just let's park right here, because I want you to understand as an applicant, okay, if you are moving out of a property and you didn't have the best or the greatest landlord and tenant relationship, when you are looking for a new place, you're meeting a new landlord for the first time. In many cases, what is a red flag is when an applicant is just bad mouthing that last landlord. And not to say that you shouldn't or you don't have a right to bad mouth that landlord, but here's why sometimes that is viewed as a flag on the play. Here's what that looks like before I get into that. So a young lady moved from a rental property because her landlord was a slum landlord, never made repairs. This tenant, she had mold in almost every room of that 4-bedroom house. The landlord never took her seriously when she requested pest control for roaches. She told the landlord that she had bed bugs, and in fact, she did. The landlord did not make any attempt to provide extermination services because the landlord said when the tenant moved in, she did not have roaches nor bed bugs, and they were not paying for extermination services. They told the tenant that she could pay for it. It wasn't in the lease, so it wasn't clear who was responsible for paying for it. So the landlord opted not to pay for it, told the tenant, you're on your own. But let me keep going. So she had mold, she had mice, she had roaches, she had bed bugs. This was a slum landlord. A slum landlord is someone who will not make repairs. They just will not do the right thing for whatever reason, right? And so she moved out of the property. She found a new place that she was really interested in. So while she was completing the application, the landlord asked this young lady, well, can you tell me why you're moving from your current place of residence, or why did you move from your prior place of residence? This young lady talked about her previous landlord so bad that it made the conversation uncomfortable for that new landlord, and it was a turnoff. So I'm sharing this because if you're trying to get your foot through the door of your next rental property, yes, you should be truthful. Yes, you should be honest. But if you're talking about that old landlord like that, then chances are you're going to talk about your new landlord like that. And so you don't want to close the door on yourself before you get in there. And so I just wanted to put a great emphasis on that. So those are the tips that I have for you as a tenant. I shared a lot for landlords. Let me go to my comment section here. Are the online rental application software that includes the tenant screening services trustworthy? Just asking your honest opinion. That is a great question. I use online software, and it does do a thorough check. It does a nation. So I pay or subscribe to a service that does a nationwide check. So it's checking for evictions across the nation, not just in that jurisdiction, because sometimes people relocate. I've seen tenants, they relocated from Midwest. I've seen tenants relocate from the West Coast to the East Coast. And so I do believe in looking at what's important. Is it important to conduct an eviction check? Is it important to conduct a background check for credit or criminal, right? Look at what's important to you, and then ultimately you should decide if the service that you're paying for, or let me just say this, some of these services now, most of them will allow the tenant to pay for it. So at one point in time, landlords will pay for it. They will collect the application fee from the tenant. Well, now you can have the software, whereas the tenants, they pay online. The background check is completed. The application process is completed online. And then the landlord will get an email to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, your applicant has successfully completed the application process. Here is a copy of the report. Because again, it's a business. So you do want to treat it like a business. So I would definitely say consider it. If you've had a bad situation where you didn't trust the software, maybe consider another company. Email me. I'll give you my email address, and I can share a couple of the software programs that I use for conducting online applications and completing that background check. Hello. Thank you so much for tuning in from the YouTube channel. Thanks, Karissa. Can renting rules be given after 10 years of signing a basic lease? So let me just understand this question here. So you have a tenant who has been in your property for 10 years. Can you just give me a little bit more background context to this question here so that I'll know how to respond? So if, for instance, you have a tenant who's been in the property for 10 years, maybe you didn't have rules in place when they first moved in, and now all of a sudden you want to give rules or provide rules. Is that what you're asking here? Now, let me just go back to this, because the basic lease is what stood out for me. Many of you know that my lease package is at least 61 pages long, no exaggeration. I believe in putting everything in writing. But I learned that over time, right? So when I first started many, many years ago, I didn't have a 61-page lease because I didn't have me in my life to know that that's what I needed. Whereas now I do cover a lot more information, and I provide a lot more details in the rental lease agreement, because I recognize and understand that it is a contract. Okay, got it. So what you can do is, not that you're changing the lease. Now you could, if the tenant is willing to renew the lease with the changes, you could consider that. Now, I don't know if your rental property is in an area whereas they're locked in, and after that first initial lease term is up, they automatically go or switch over month to month, right? In DC and certain tenant-friendly jurisdictions, tenants are not required to sign another lease. So in that case, I would recommend sending a letter to the tenant to say, hey, effective August the 1st, we are implementing blah, blah, blah. We're implementing, let's say, inspections. Maybe you didn't do quarterly inspections in the beginning, right? Send a letter. Make sure you put it in a tenant's file. I would recommend sending it by way of email as well as a physical letter. You definitely want to communicate in multiple ways so that you can prove that you notified your tenant. You can let them know that you are doing this because you want to improve the quality of the rental home. But if they rejected, and if they don't allow you to come in and to make good on what you're saying that you're going to do, and if it's not in writing, then you can't really fight them on it. But I would definitely recommend sending a letter. I would have a soft conversation, just letting them know the changes that you're implementing in your rental business, because again, it is a business. And I know that for tenants who have been in properties for 20 plus years, their lease may be 2 pages long because things were different back then. Right now, nowadays, you have to put everything in writing. You have to put in writing that they're responsible for the electric or the gas or whatever utilities are, and provide them with the utility company name, the telephone number. And then you also want to put in your lease that they should do those things. They should turn the utilities on within 2 business days. And then you also want to add to that, you're going to follow up. And if the utilities are not turned on within 2 business days, that the service may be interrupted. See, you have to put all those things in writing now, because sometimes people just don't know. And here's what I do know, that people will do things because either they don't know or because they don't care, which is why it should be in writing. But thank you so much for that question. Definitely send a tenant a letter, letting them know the proposed changes. Give them advance notice. If it's going to be a shock to them, try to give them at least 60 days. But on average, unless it's an increase in the rent, on average, a 30-day notice is good. But if it's going to be like a hard change that you think they may fight you on, sometimes giving them a little bit more cushion just to ease them into the change is helpful. So I do hope that helps. Marathon Trucking, thank you so much for tuning in. Do you think $500 a month and is good cash flow? Hit the like button. It's free. So, do you think $500 a month is good cash flow? Well, it just depends. If that's your bottom line, it could be. Do you have $500 just for this one rental, or is it for multiple rentals? Listen, cash flow at the end of the day is cash flow. As long as you are saving, as long as you are seeing a profit, as long as you are, you're not upside down, I would say yes. Anything. I mean, ultimately, it's $500 more than what you had, right? So it just depends on the goal of that rental property. For some people, $500 is not a good cash flow. For others, it is a good cash flow. So it just depends on what the goal is of the property, your financial goal, the performance goal of the property. If it's one unit, if it's multiple units. Great question. Thank you so much for tuning in and for asking that question. All right, as I wrap up, I just want to make sure I'm answering all of your questions. Let me share my email address, because I told you I was going to do that. For those of you who do have questions, feel free to email me. If you are a landlord in the Prince George's County area, I'm going to be sharing, you may see some advertising coming up soon. We are now implementing an event to help landlords connect with tenants in Prince George's County, Maryland. And so if you have rental property, you know someone who is in the Prince George's County area, they're looking for tenants. We are providing an in-person event. It's going to be workshops. We're going to answer questions. You'll be able to connect with tenants who are looking for rental property in Prince George's County, Maryland. You'll get more information about this. If you are interested in learning more about that, please email me. That's my email address at the bottom of the screen there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I do hope that this information was helpful. I shared tips for landlords today. I shared tips for tenants today. I know that I covered a lot of information, but for landlords, let me just do a recap of what I shared today, because I want you all to understand the importance of showing up when I'm live every Monday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I shared tips today as we're talking about the truth about tenant screening, The common mistake that many landlords make is relying solely on credit scores without checking references. The second common mistake that landlords make is completely skipping the background check altogether to try to save time or money. Never ever do that. And then the third biggest common mistake that landlords make is failing to verify employment and income sources. I know that there are a lot of fears. Landlords do fear accepting a tenant who may damage the property. They do fear renting to someone who will consistently pay the rent or not pay rent at all. And another fear of landlord is being sued for discriminatory, improper screening practices. Okay. I get it. I understand it, which is why I'm sharing this information, because I know that many of you you desire to find reliable tenants. You desire to reduce your turnover rate and fill those vacant units. And you desire to have peace of mind knowing that you have a good tenant in place. And like I said, it's frustrating when you have high turnover rate or frequent vacancies. It's frustrating when you experience having a tenant that rents a property and they are continuously tearing it up. They're continuously damaging that unit. It's no fun having to come out of pocket and, continuously pay for those things, as well as having late payments. I shared 3 tips for tenants on today. I shared the importance of preparing to go through that background check, to be thoroughly screened, asking questions up front. I shared tips for tenants to know and understand the importance of being honest and transparent, communicating and sharing if you have had a less than desirable landlord and tenant history, if you have some dents or maybe less than perfect credit. Communicate that up front. Know what the rules and regulations are. I also shared a tip for tenants to showcase your stability, why you are the best fit for that property. All right. So that is it. That's what I shared today. I went a little bit over in time. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that this was of value for you. My time is up, and I absolutely thank you for yours. Please make sure that you subscribe to that YouTube channel. You can find me on YouTube, Landlord Lyfe with Karissa Spann. I enjoy coming live, sharing this information. Thank you for those who are watching the replay. I'm live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube every Monday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I look forward to seeing you all next week. And again, please like, please tag, please share this information with someone today. Sharing is caring. I'm going to say bye for now. I'm Karissa Spann, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. Have an amazing week. Listen, we are in the summer. It's June already. If you're going on vacation, please enjoy yourselves. Live life and don't let life live you. I'll see you all next week.